wild, doesn't it? Mine wild as 9 o'clock. All right, are we ready to go with proceed with closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Members of the jury, let me make one comment or one observation before closing arguments begin. As I indicated to you previously, what the attorneys say is not evidence. You can take any notes you want on what they say in closing arguments. Just make sure that you clearly mark it as statements of counsel so you don't get it confused with the evidence in the case. All right.
Please, court. Members of the jury. I think it goes without saying that your service as jurors on this case is certainly appreciated by the state of Tennessee, I'm sure the defense attorneys, and the citizens of Davidson County. Serving on a jury is really one of the few things that ask citizens to do. Some people live their whole lives here and never get a summons, never get to serve. Others maybe once, twice, smaller counties, perhaps any number of times. But I suspect that this will be an experience that you will not soon forget, if ever. There are a lot of Waffle Houses around, and I can't imagine that, at least for the foreseeable future, when you drive past one, see one, that this case won't come back into your mind. And I say that because I can only imagine the survivors, the families, anyone connected with this case having to live with that for the rest of their lives. Because of the actions of one man. One man who I submit to you, the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and actually I would submit beyond any doubt, is the person who committed these acts. But part of your duty is to not just accept that because he has been charged and that relieves the state of its obligation. You heard from many witnesses. I think about 29 witnesses called by the state to prove the facts of this case, because that is our burden. And if you could put up, I'm not going to dwell on that, and I do not intend to belabor any of the arguments in this case. And one thing I do want to point out, just because I am putting up a few select portions of the charge does not mean that these are more important than others. I think the judge will tell you you're to take the jury instructions as a whole. No one part is more important than another. But for the purpose of argument, which is what this is, reasonable doubt. The state has the burden of proof. That's the same in every case, be it shoplifting, burglary, first-degree murder, of proving the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And absolute certainty, this is the phrase that I would submit comes into play throughout the course of this case. Absolute certainty is not required, but moral certainty is required. And have we not heard that phrase? Something being immoral, it would be an immoral act to convict someone when the proof is not there. That is sort of a basic tenet, I submit, in our lives and in human behavior. Morality, knowing right from wrong. It would be wrong to convict someone with a lesser standard than what is required by the law. And that is the point would make with that. Hold the state, review the evidence. I submit the state has proven, and quite frankly, even in an opening statement, the defense has told you that they did not contest that Travis Reinking was the person who did this mass murder, and but for James Shaw, the death count certainly would have been higher. I may come back to that in a moment. But that's where we are in the sense of the criminal law, submit to you, is based upon reviewing facts, applying the law as the judge will give it to you, and making that determination of what's right and wrong. And I submit to you on behalf of the state of Tennessee, it would be wrong not to convict Travis Reinking of all 16 counts in this indictment. His defense is one of that he should be held blameless for his actions. But let's just see what the law is and what he did with respect to the first-degree murder. I know we did not talk about elements all that much. It's been mentioned many times, but as far as what the state has to prove, and I just put up the first one. Obviously, there are other counts for Torian Sonderland, Aquila Da Silva, and Diebny Groves. But this is the start. That's why it has Joe Perez. Unlawfully killed the victims. Joe, Torian, Aquila, Diebny. No legal justification, in other words. It was against the law. Intentionally. Every step that this man took was intentional. Every step. This was no accident. This was no mistake. He intended to do exactly what he did. And all along the way, there were choices. And he's the one who made those choices. The 22 or so people who were at that Waffle House had no choice. They were there, some by working, others by happenstance. Joe Perez because of a flat tire. Their choices and Mr. Reinking's choices are so at odds. They did not choose to be his victims. He chose them. That the killing was premeditated. The intent to kill formed before the act. And it doesn't have to be any specific period of time. It could be formed in an instant for that matter. But here we have proof, and you've heard, Mr. Reinking thought about this, thought about doing a similar type of acts a long time before. And even in that time when he's sitting in the truck, that's time. And when it talks about the mental state of the accused at the time, so don't get that confused, please, with the insanity aspect of it. This is that the person is so emotional that they can't form premeditation. Capable of premeditation, even if he had been excited at the time he fired the shots when he blew Joe Perez's brains out, gunned down Torian Sonderland. like he was on some hunting expedition. If he was excited, wouldn't have mattered because he planned to do it ahead of time. He had premeditated ahead of time. But you know from seeing the videos, he was not in a state of excitement. Cold, calculated killer. So, has the state proven the elements of a premeditated first-degree murder? I submit, yes, beyond any reasonable doubt. Attempted first-degree murder. And again, we've been perhaps so focused or not mentioned enough, perhaps, of what serious bodily injury is. It's the same, the attempt. Did he attempt to kill Gentia Wagner, Sharita Henderson, Kayla Shaw, and James Shaw Jr.? Certainly. His intent was to kill everyone in that place and then move on. But serious bodily injury, you saw the catastrophic battle-type injuries, war wounds suffered by Shantia and Sharita. Look at that. Substantial risk of death, yes. Many times you might have one or two of these. Substantial risk of death. Extreme physical pain. Being shot by an assault rifle with essentially exploding bullets. Protracted or obvious disfigurement. They will live with that the rest of their lives. Every morning they wake up, through the day, at night before going to sleep, if they can sleep. They know they have been disfigured for life. Substantial impairment or function of a bodily member, organ, or mental facility. Absolutely. When you have to learn how to not use your dominant hand and being an artist, I mean, how worse can it be short of death? Those are the counts. And he used a firearm in each and every one. The last four counts are the alternative counts of felony murder. That Joe Perez, Tarian Sonderland, Aquila da Silva, and D'Ebony Groves were killed during the perpetration of when he was attempting to commit first-degree murder on others. That's essentially it. It does not require, for these counts, necessary premeditation. It's a legal aspect. It's just, did he kill them while he was trying to kill someone else? Yes. And as far as Kayla Shaw and James Shaw, theirs, thankfully for them, do not include a serious bodily injury. Did they suffer bodily injury? Certainly. Certainly. And will they live with it the rest of their lives? Yes. As I submit, perhaps all of us in this courtroom and many watching remotely. You heard officers and witnesses, people who were there. I submit at times struggling to find the words to describe what they saw when they arrived at this scene and what they saw that Travis Reinking had done. Everything from war zone, horrific, the words that, how do you describe something so horrible, much less live through it? But I submit, members of the jury, the one word which ties back to moral certainty and the foundation of criminal law, this was an evil act. Evil. And who described it as that? Man in the blue shirt sitting behind me. He's the one. And what more apt description. He knew it was evil. He committed evil. And that takes us to the defense burden of insanity. And the judge will give you, again, the entire charge, all of the law that can apply to this case for you to consider. But burden of proof. State has a burden of proof, and if you, as a jury of 12, believe that the state has carried its burden, then you determine, is Travis Reinking blameless because he can meet the requirements of the insanity defense in the state of Tennessee? I submit no. Because that law has a high burden. I believe you heard the judge say that it's one of the examples is when the state is taking your child, your under 18 child, away from you, terminating your parental rights, one of the most sacred rights that we have as parents. Travis Reinking terminated the parental rights of the families of Joe Perez, Torian Sonderland, Aquila da Silva, and D'Ebony Groves. He terminated their parental rights. It is a high standard. For you to find this man blameless, you have to be convinced, clearly convinced, clear and convincing evidence that he had a severe mental disease or defect at the time. And listen, it was at the time of the shooting, at the time when he's driving up there, at the time when he's making that decision. Did he? Haven't disputed that. Yes. Schizophrenia is defined as a severe mental illness. He's been diagnosed with it for some years. Chose not to do anything about it, but you get choices. We have a lot of choices coming into play in this case. But be that as it may, yes. But that's not the end all. That is not the end all to this analysis. That word "and," 3 little letters that mean so much. And. That as a result, not just that he had a severe mental illness and killed people, that is no defense, but that as a result, a connection that you and you alone can make. He was not able to understand the nature of what he was doing. The nature. That's one thing, submit, everyone agrees on. He knew he was killing people. Now he draws them as stick figures a year later There are people, there's no question about that. He knew. He knew. He knew when he put the plan in motion to get the revenge, he was going to kill people, take something from them that could not be brought back, could not be given back, their lives. Or, see, we had an and the first time. This is an or. Because we've ruled out, he knew the nature of what he was doing. He was shooting and killing people. To understand that what he was doing was wrong. The law does not distinguish between legal and moral wrongfulness. It is enough that he knew that it was wrong in some form or another. It's legally wrong to commit murder. It's morally wrong if you do not have a justification. There are other acts that are immoral that are not crimes. Some used to be. Times change. Definitions of mental illness change. But this law is what we go by. And if there is any one thing that says he knew this was morally wrong, it's evil. What he was doing was evil. We stand back, step back, submit, and look at those choices. He says, is this really what he was supposed to be doing? Conflicted, and we can get into all of the psycho testimony about God ordering this, the aliens and things. He has schizophrenia. Apparently he has an active imagination. He has a Taylor Swift attraction. Apparently he must have to stand in line for that, from what the doctors say. That's in and of itself not that unusual. Maybe the extremes, but again, that has nothing to do, submit, with did he know what he was doing when he killed these 4 innocent people, wounded others, put many lives in danger, in jeopardy. Did he know that was wrong? Did he know that was wrong? Of course he did. He tells you that in his own words. And the judge will give you an instruction about how to go about assessing things that were told to the doctors, and we've mentioned that a little bit about the background and the information. And they say, well, he just didn't know it was wrong. Heard the cross-examination, General Dowdy of Dr. Wood, which seemed like most every other answer that she had was, well, it can be, it can be. Well, certainly it can be, and in this case it was, that he knew it was wrong. And yes, they are both ordered by the court. The court chooses them, contract to do it. Going to get that instruction about how you weigh expert testimony, how you decide it, and that's, again, your call. Like everything, when you go back to that deliberation room, the 12 of you who decide this case, it's your call. That's the way the system works. You decide the facts. You decide whether the carnage that he inflicted upon these people, the community, was without any legal blame to assess to him. assessing the expert testimony. It's the thing about dealing with what somebody's thinking. Dr. Deering can show you he's an expert, cite his opinions, and just like really would anybody else. But he can show you things. He can put up, here's an x-ray showing a bullet, showing how someone's insides have been exploded by the choice of weapon and ammunition used. He can corroborate that. Same thing with the firearms examination expert, DNA, scientific testing, scientific methods. And that's not to say that there are not methods, testing available in the mental health area. Oh, but if someone refuses to take those tests, you just move on and base it on your observations, your training, your experience, and your review of the materials that you have. Which brings us to Dr. Eisen. I would posit to you that no one was happier when General Norman stopped questioning her. She was cross-examined, I submit. You saw it, you heard it. Her opinion, I submit, was destroyed by the cross-examination of General Norman. As well it should have been. Even down to the, oh, no, I didn't watch the video of what happened outside. Couldn't get it to play. Couldn't get it to play. So. And then to say, oh, well, no, it wouldn't change my opinion. I've made my opinion, and nothing is going to change it in spite of any and all contradictions to the basis. Punishment. And we do circle around a little at odds in its jumping, but what goes through and was going through Travis Reinking's mind was evil. Some other words I believe he used that he felt it was foreboding, sickening, unholy. That's all wrong. Wrong, 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 and he knew it. But he acted not out of, I submit, some command by God, Morgan Freeman, or because we know he'd been commanded according to him, and again, we're basing this on his telling of the events, that he was mad. He had plans to get this fancy BMW, load it up, sell his truck, go to Colorado, live the good life. Something doesn't sound so bad if your life is really not that great in the first place. And that YouTube video, if I'm talking about the toilet seat and all that sort of stuff, if you notice, he had furniture in that. He had, same guitar there. He wasn't living on the street. Wasn't some, person who had to sleep in the truck or under a bridge? No. He had finances, apparently. He had things, computers, to occupy himself and to give voice to his perceived slights and things that he was not having but felt he was entitled to the extent of taking the BMW. Amazing the advances in the GPS tracking and all of the things. So fortunately, Miss Jacobson did not try to resist any more than she did while she was being carjacked. She was a victim of a crime of violence. But she made the choice of letting go. She knew he had a tracking device and they'll get the car back. Almost got it back real quickly, except that he fled from the police, got away, and they back off, as certainly appropriate. They knew as well, we'll find it eventually. They did, outside his apartment, where he'd taken the decal, the sticker, how much it is, and all of the things that you see on new cars. He'd taken that off. Why? Submit. Knowledge of wrongfulness. Could be. Hiding the fact that it's a new car without even probably dealer tags on it, but getting ready to go. But they got it back too quickly, and that made him mad. So, enacting some method of revenge. There, its car is taken back. His car is taken away from him. So, what's he say? I'm going to take something from them that they can't get back. Lives. Revenge. Raging against the world is some things people do vocally. Say, I'm being mistreated, the world's against me. It's fine. Not everyone has the perfect life. I'm not sure anyone does, if you really get down to it. But we have the opportunity for that. We have choices. We have the ability, if we have sufficient intellect and abilities to make choices. There is no question but that Mr. Reinking is an intelligent person. Average, if not above, IQ. A talented person, I submit. A crane operator. Heard Detective Summerall, which, again, a lot of this coincidences, but coincidentally, he had been trained as a crane operator, and your mind can't wander if you're doing that with other people's lives at risk. I submit. Mr. Reinking was able to do that periodically. Get paid for it. Did he have acts on occasion called into question whether he needed treatment? Yes, certainly. But on this occasion, at the time of the commission of these evil acts, he made the choice after reflecting upon it and weighing, submit the possibilities. This was no command delusion, no alien delusion, because if it was, he would have not, submit, had any second thoughts. He would not have had any internal discussions about it being evil, sickening. One of the instructions that you will hear is about flight. And ties into a couple of things. The reason I put it up, it's the law. Flight, voluntary withdrawal of oneself for the purpose of evading arrest or prosecution. What more clear evidence of that was talk of every alphabet agency known to man was in on this event trying to capture Travis Reinking. He was hiding out, leaving the scene of the difficulty, and a subsequent hiding out, evasion, or concealment. He did all that. Literally hundreds of officers, helicopters, and he was able to avoid detection for some 33 hours. That's a long time, ladies and gentlemen, when you got that much law enforcement bearing down upon you. And on the other hand, an entirely innocent person may take flight, may be explained by proof offered, which is back to the mental health experts. Oh, well, police were after him anyway. He would have already fled. But remember, one of the things he said that when he got back to his apartment, changing, putting on clothes, showering, getting ready, here's the sirens outside. The law is on the way. Time to get out of here, pack my go bag, and see if I can avoid apprehension. Gun, silver bars, the other things, water bottles. And he did for quite some time. And again, in assessing, and that's fine, thank you. In assessing all of this evidence of what he did and why he did it, so as to excuse his conduct, he says, well, everything can be explained. Oh, he surrendered, followed commands. He did not fight. He did not act like anyone who was in a psychotic episode, as meant. No. And I would submit that if you think about it, the procedure he went through in the hospital, if everybody is out, if everybody is CIA, hacking, doing all these things, that would have been the time to, no, you're not going to do that to me. No, complied. Or when Detective Clare goes to him to say, I need some of your bodily, cells. If you're paranoid, you're going to say, oh, sure, go ahead. I'll, swab my cheeks and be compliant. Now, he's just the, how did Dr. Eisen describe him? Polite young man, ready to be released. Say choices, and I'm going to not be much longer. I know y'all appreciate that, but these were choices made by a grown man who was living not the best life, but he was living a life of choices. Choice of which Waffle House to go to or to go back. Right. But he made a choice, and several choices, that he tells you that weren't direct commands from God, or whatever. Well, God says go shoot people. Well, does he mean, paintball gun? Does he mean a camera? Oh, well, I have a number of items I can choose from. Actually, I don't know if you want to cut that off. It's a little... Okay, thank you. What did he choose? His bolt-action small game rifle, the plinking, the 22, holds, 5 or 6 rounds in its little magazine with the scope. No. Or even the deer rifle, the 30-06 with the scope. Whether you want to characterize it as sniper rifle, use at a concert, or whatever, but yeah, the hunting rifle, the deer rifle. No. The pistol? No. Maybe not that good a shot, but save that for another day. No, he chose a human hunting weapon, a semi-automatic assault style rifle, loaded with a magazine containing 30 of these. 30. Exploding bullets. Human killing bullets. Each one of these, I submit, ladies and gentlemen, could represent another dead human being, but for James Shaw Jr. He saw an opportunity and he took it, while this man was out of ammunition from the first. In that moment where the magazine has to be taken out, and he's in his jacket with the 2 other magazines. What choice, what a great choice that James Shaw Jr. made to fight him, to take the rifle away, to be burned. And these went unused. Lives saved. That was a choice. Travis Reinking did not get to continue his carnage of shooting and shooting, not just 3, not just that, for some reason, that sign. He wasn't going to stop until he was stopped. Submit, we all have choices between right and wrong, good or evil, moral or immoral. And I submit the proof in this case is that Travis Reinking committed these crimes, is guilty of these crimes, and he has not in any way, shape, form, or fashion presented any clear and convincing evidence to the contrary. Both sides have a burden of proof. You'll hold the state to its, I know. And if you hold the defense to theirs, based upon what you heard from Dr. Wood, Dr. Eisen, and the evidence they presented, this man committed murder. He is guilty as charged. He is not legally blameless for these actions that destroyed so many lives. Thank you.
Good morning. Mr. Moore used the term blameless 4 times by my count. He said that our defense is that we're asking you to hold Mr. Reinking blameless. That's not our defense. Our defense is that we ask you to hold him not guilty by reason of insanity. We have not disputed what he did, not in jury selection, not in opening statement, not in this trial. We never did say that he wasn't responsible for the deaths and the injuries and what happened at Waffle House. Our defense is that he was legally insane at the time and therefore is not guilty by reason of insanity. We live in the state of Tennessee. It's a good and decent state. And in a good and decent state, in this state, the legislature has put in place laws that allow for individuals who are severely mentally ill, and as a result of that, commit acts and without the understanding that the acts that they're committing are wrong. The legislature has put in place a procedure for those people, for these mentally ill people. And that's because people that are this severely mentally ill, that can't understand the wrongfulness of their actions, do not belong in a prison. Now, you were told that you can't consider, if you find him not guilty by reason of insanity, what's going to happen to him. You can't factor that in. But you've also been told, and it's in the jury instructions, that you know he will be detained if you find him not guilty by reason of insanity. He does not walk out of this courtroom. He is automatically detained, and there will be other medical and legal proceedings. So the defense is not hold him blameless. The defense is to find him not guilty by reason of insanity. On April the 22nd of 2018, there's really no dispute that Travis Reinking was suffering from schizophrenia. He was having delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thoughts. He acted on what he believed to be a command from God to go to the Waffle House and shoot 3 people and that he was doing so in self-defense because of the harassment and stalking and hacking and everything that was happening to him. Now that sounds totally crazy. And that's because it is crazy. But none of us are schizophrenics. We can't possibly understand the suffering that he was going through or understand what was going on in his mind. That's why we brought experts in here to explain it. Now we know that Mr. Reinking has been suffering from schizophrenia for years. How do you know that? Well, we brought in information to you through the experts and the things that they had reviewed. Dr. Eisen talked about how he was having delusions back in 2015 of alien encounters, communicating with aliens, helping aliens fight a war. In May of 2016, Mr. Reinking thought that Taylor Swift had come to his little town of Morton, Illinois, and was there to harass him. And he went out looking for her with his mother, looking for Taylor Swift in Morton, Illinois. He obviously, something was wrong, so the ERS was called and they responded, and then he ended up being hospitalized because of these delusions and this schizophrenia. He was released. Eventually, he goes to Colorado, and in March of 2017, when he's in Colorado, he's having these same delusions, and he reaches out for help to law enforcement by calling 911. And you heard Dr. Wood tell you about that, how he was saying that he's continuing to be stalked by Taylor Swift and stalked on the internet, and that he thinks that the police are actually involved out to get him. You heard there was a reference on the cross-examination of Eisen about in May 17 when Mr. Reinking was writing this journal, and referred to as a book, I think is what we refer to. And you heard how he said he was questioning his own sanity and wondering himself, is he crazy with all of these delusions? A month later, in June of 2017, my understanding is coming out where he lives and is going to work, something along those lines, and had a pink robe or pink dress on, talking about whether or not he's a man. And then the same day he goes to the community swimming pool in this same pink robe, pink dress with his underwear on, makes all these statements, jumps in the pool, gets out and exposes himself. This man's not in his right mind. The next month, on July the 7th, he is suffering so bad from this schizophrenia that he says, I've tried to call law enforcement, I've tried to reach out, I'm going to go see the President of the United States and tell him myself I need help. And he sees nothing wrong with going literally to Washington, D.C. to walk on the White House grounds, to try to go into the White House to talk to the President of the United States about helping him. You saw and you heard that roughly the fall, August, September of 2017, that he started making these videos, these YouTube videos. And in these YouTube videos, you heard the described, I think there was 30 of them, and that there's over and over and over, he's angry, he's scared, there's all these issues. We played you one of them to get a flavor of what's on there. You could see the madness. He eventually moves to Nashville in roughly February of 2018. Still having these intense delusions, these intense hallucinations, this paranoia. They're out to get him, they're out to hurt him. He believes people, while he's not there, are breaking into his apartment, messing with his computer, taking his passwords, hacking the internet. he's not in the real world in his mind. Only 5 days before the Waffle House incident, he goes to the BMW dealership. I don't have to walk you through what happened there. But the most interesting, perhaps the most significant part of that whole incident is when the salesperson said, I was with him for about 5 minutes outside the car, with him about 8 or 9 minutes. And after he took the car, I went inside, and the other people inside said, was he on drugs? Was he on alcohol? And it hit her. She remembered, I've had a friend suffering from schizophrenia for 7 years. And the interaction she had with Mr. Reinking, her words were, it did seem to parallel. She's noticing it 5 days beforehand. The police do this pursuit for 2 minutes, 1.5 miles, 40 to 50 miles per hour, and they pull off of him. And as you heard, that made him wonder what's going on. The police knew I took the car, they were right behind me. What is going on? That added to his schizophrenic issues. You saw his apartment. You could see pictures of this apartment where this man lives at this particular time. He had a folding chair, a computer desk chair, a bunch of computers, phones, things like that, sleeping on the floor, not a couch, nothing. He, I would say, is at the height of his schizophrenic delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thoughts, paranoia. And then he believes, he wakes up in the morning, I think he said, and he said he asked for guidance, and then he believes that God tells him to go to the Waffle House, wear only a green jacket, take your gun with you, and kill 3 people. The people at the Waffle House are with the CIA and the FBI, and they're out to get him, and he must act in self-defense. He said that if, in effect, I'm going to do what I believe God is telling me to do, but if I'm mistaken in what God is telling me to do, God will make the Waffle House be closed, make nobody be there, make my gun jam. He's in turmoil, but he believes that God has told him, you need to go there and do this as an act in self-defense because of all the torment and the harassment that you are receiving. Again, to us, it's totally crazy. But to him, it's reality. They talked about choices. And my co-counsel in the opening statement talked about choices are based on your perception. How do you perceive things? Well, when you're a schizophrenic and you're in Travis's world, you don't perceive things like normal people do. Mr. Reinking gets into his truck, his own truck, registered to him, that has paperwork in it identifying him, where he lives, and he drives to the Waffle House. He does park in the front. There's no question about that. Now, the state would have you believe that, well, he parks right in the front where he can see everything going on in the Waffle House. I disagree with that. I'll show you this picture just real quick. I'm not saying that you can't see in part of the Waffle House from where he parks, but the state trying to sell you that he parked right in the front where he could see everything going on in the Waffle House is simply not accurate. You can just look at the picture and tell that. He sits right there. You can pull the picture. He sits right there, and he sits in the car, and he's waiting on a sign. And while he is sitting there with nothing on but this jacket, Mr. McMurray and Mr. Shaw walk by. And if you remember, Mr. McMurray looked at him, and he said that he had a piercing stare. Mr. Reinking, it didn't seem right. He looks like the person who would shoot up a place. James Shaw came in and said, well, what Mr. McMurray really said was, look at that crazy MFer. James Shaw said he looked like he didn't care. James Shaw testified, and this was very interesting, he had that same look on his face as he does today. And I would imagine y'all have been looking at Mr. Reinking this entire week, at least at some points in time. Mr. Reinking is sitting there and he says, I'm looking for a sign. I'm looking for a sign. The blinking hazard lights come on, and he says, those are taunting me. But then he sees the sign. Mr. Perez walks by with a hat on, and that hat has a number 3 on it. This picture is the picture I gave, the first picture that I gave to Dr. Deering to show all the clothing that was taken, and he described a black hat and a blue hat polo. They both had number 3s on it. I blew up one of them so that you can see it better, where you can clearly see the number 3. And if you recall, there was testimony that Mr. Reinking was obsessed with the number 3. He sent 333 starbursts to Taylor Swift. He talks about the Holy Trinity. He talks about him and his 2 wives, although he doesn't even have one. He would talk about the 3 of us, I think with Dr. Eisen, meaning me, Celine, and Crystal. But sometimes the 3 of them were me, Celine, and Crystal through Dr. Eisen. He believes he's given the sign, and he gets out, and we all watched what he did. Now, one thing I want to bring up that I thought was interesting that the state brought up on cross-examination was with Ms. Eisen, and we've heard about cross-examination of Ms. Eisen. Ms. Eisen, isn't it something to the effect about Mr. Reinking wearing a disguise? A disguise is what she was trying to sell. That he disguised himself by being naked. I would say that could be the worst disguise that anybody could ever have. Maybe you could have put on jeans, a shirt, a jacket or something, and if an APB goes out saying there's a guy in jeans and a shirt and a jacket or a hat or whatever, you might blend in with some other people. But when the APB goes out and it says there's a naked man running down the street, that's not a very good disguise. But the state would try to couch that and sell you that look at this choice of his disguise. He leaves the scene, and at first, and the description was he ran away. And that's why we asked questions to several people about, did he run away or did he walk away? And there was several of them that said he walked away. James Shaw, trotted away or fast-paced walk. James Shaw said saw him walking down the shoulder of the road. Kayla Shaw, walking on the shoulder of the road without any clothes on Murfreesboro Road. Chelsea Owens, in the grass area not too far off the road. Officer Gilpin with his K9 Brax tracked a scent, if you remember, in the grass right next to the road. So Mr. Reinking, in this fleeing, walks almost a mile naked down the side of Murfreesboro Pike. If you recall, Mr. Reinking had driven his own vehicle to the scene, and we had, on cross-examination of Ms. Connor, we pointed out that the keys were in the ignition. And she herself said, we were wondering, why didn't he leave in his own vehicle? That's a great question. Why didn't he leave in his own vehicle? Because he's out of his mind. He leaves the vehicle there with all identifying information of who he is. He leaves the scene, and you heard the testimony that he was afraid that the police would come. He's already got this paranoia of them, and that they would come for him. And he has this paranoia of the police and the government, and so he flees. He goes and gets this thing, and he puts this backpack together, and he's caught. And you heard about the backpack. I'm gonna come back around to that backpack, but I want to address two other issues real quick before the backpack. I thought it was interesting that Detective Summerall said this was the easiest homicide ever to solve. Gun, video, Travis Reinking's truck on the scene. Of course it was. It's committed by a person with a severe mental illness. Of course it would be easy to solve. Another issue before we move on that I want to address, because it comes up kind of chronologically here, is when Mr. Shaw took the stand and he was testifying, and he said that when he went outside that he heard Mr. Reinking make this racial statement. I don't know why he said that, but we put on proof through the detective Clara that when they interviewed Mr. Shaw 3 days after the incident, Mr. Shaw himself said twice, I never heard him say anything racial. Not once, but twice. Told the law enforcement, I never heard him say anything racial. But when he testified, all of a sudden we have that statement. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. So we get back to the backpack. Now this backpack, the idea, if you believe what the state is saying, and that Mr. Reinking was going to take this backpack and somehow he was going to make his way to Canada. In the backpack, there's water, silver bars. Silver bars. There's a gun, but did you hear what the ballistics experts say? It's not in normal operating condition. And there's a Bible in the backpack. And that would make total sense from a man who thinks he's being commanded by God to do things. He'd have a tough time going to Canada without his passport that was left in the safe when you saw it was opened up in front of you. I think there was actually more than one. So is that really what was going on here? This plan to go to Canada? And the safe. Now that was interesting. Detective Summerall, the lead guy in this whole thing, took the stand and he said, yeah, I looked in the safe in Mr. Reinking's apartment and I found the BMW key. It was in the safe. And the state introduced the safe. So then we asked him to come out here. Was there anything else in the safe? No, not that I can remember. I don't remember anything else being in the safe. No, I don't know if there's anything else in the safe. Don't remember anything in there. That BMW key. Okay, well, let's look. So what's in the safe that was found inside Mr. Reinking's apartment? A letter to Oprah Winfrey asking for help with his situation with Taylor Swift. A letter to Taylor Swift. There's other letters. You can read them. They're in evidence at this point. But to Summerall, apparently that wasn't significant in this case. That's not important in a case dealing with insanity. Just that BMW key is. but he had those in his apartment when they searched it. Let's talk about motive briefly. The motive is not, you heard early on, state likes to say, oh, motive's not, we don't have to prove motive, and they don't. But it's on some level, you have to look at a case and say, what could possibly be the motive for doing this? The state has pitched to you, even today, the motive was that he had stolen this BMW and somebody had taken that BMW, and out of revenge, he went to the Waffle House and did what he did. Really? He was so angry that they took that BMW that he went to the Waffle House with that gun with nothing but a jacket on and shot all those people? That's the motive? Or was, in his mind, was he commanded by God to do those specific things? Now the experts. So, it should be pretty clear about now that before we even came on this case, the court ordered these experts to evaluate Mr. Reinking. That is the procedure we have in Davidson County. Now, defense attorneys can go out and hire somebody to do that, but there is a mechanism in place that for the courts to send people to Vanderbilt and eventually the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute, if necessary, for them to be evaluated. And that's done so that independent evaluations can be done. Not bought and paid for by the state, not bought and paid for by the defense, an independent evaluation. So he first goes to Vanderbilt University, and the case is assigned to Dr. Wood. Dr. Wood is one of 7 people in this entire state that's board certified in forensic pathology. She has done, she said, I believe it was nearly 900 of these evaluations. And what she does is she says, I gather records, I gather reports, I get any information I can get, videos, whatever else, from the state and from the defense. And I conduct interviews and I meet with colleagues and I do my evaluation and I come back with my opinion. And in this case, her opinion is that at the time of the offense, Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe mental disease or defect, that being schizophrenia, and that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. We had Dr. Eisen. Dr. Eisen, again, it's the same thing. Once Mr. Reinking is finished at Vanderbilt, he was sent for inpatient evaluation over a period of roughly 30 days or so, and then I think it continued after that, with the team at the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute. And they do the same type of thing, reviewing things, reviewing records, reviewing reports, and then they, with a collaborative effort, come up with an opinion and a report. And MTMHI came up specifically, Dr. Eisen, Dr. Kovach, who you heard had been there for over 20 years, and Dr. Fikes, all collaborated, adopted, and signed off on the report, with the opinion being that Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe disease or mental defect, that being schizophrenia, and that he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. 3 doctors from MTMHI signed off on that opinion. 3 doctors. You heard about how the interactions with Mr. Reinking there, that he was continuing to suffer some delusions while he was being treated at MTMHI. You heard about hallucinations. He thought that the government was trying to kill him. The question was asked, with these delusions and hallucinations and disorganized thoughts, do schizophrenics believe them wholeheartedly? And she said yes. And I think the question was asked, even if there's proof to the contrary shown to them, they still believe it in their mind. She said while he was at MTHI, he would talk out loud and have conferences with aliens. Heard voices of aliens, thought he was married to a supernatural being. He said any logical person would see that what I did was self-defense. Mr. Moore mentioned something about the cross-examinations, and specifically cross-examinations of Dr. Eisen. And I want to briefly talk about some of the things on these cross-examinations that I thought was somewhat peculiar. If you recall, when Dr. Wood was cross-examined by Mr. Dowdy, there came a point in time where this handwritten journal was brought out, and they were going through certain parts of it. And they got to page 13, and they read what was on page 13, and Mr. Dowdy said, there's nothing in there about a command from God. You don't see anything there about a command from God. Where's that? You don't see anything about that. And then he moved on. But I was paying attention. So when I got up on my redirect, I asked her to turn one more page to page 14. And there's the whole command from God, the whole thing. She read it out to you. He's had the journal. We all have the journal. We've all read the journal. But he asked her a question, where is that? She doesn't know off the top of her head, and then he moves on, knowing it's on the very next page. He asked her about exhibitionism and sadomasochism, and I don't know if you caught it, but he said, as far as exhibitionism is, well, he took his own pants off before he left the house, and he went to the Waffle House and harmed people. Is he trying to say that this was some sort of sexual thing with exhibitionism and sadomasochism? Miss Norman cross-examined Dr. Eisen. And there came a point in time when she said, Dr. Eisen, look on this page at this line. What did Mr. Reinking say to you? And you heard the racial slur, the racial statement. And you could hear an audible gasp in this courtroom. Clearly giving the impression that it was Mr. Reinking that statement originated from. Clearly giving that impression. But again, Mr. Evans, on his toes, paying attention, knowing the facts, got up on cross-examination and said, Dr. Eisen, read the rest of that line. What does that say? Mr. Reinking was telling me what somebody else had said at the Waffle House. Now, had we not been on our toes paying attention, you would have been left with the impression that that's what he said at the time of the killing. We had to come forward and give you the context. It was brought up. Miss Eisen, at some point, Mr. Reinking showed a fondness for you. He was into you, he liked you, whatever the words were, the fondness with you. The fondness was, according to her, is, yeah, he thought that his wife was inside her body, that he was talking to his wife. But if you were left with just this fondness, you would have this picture, something funny was maybe going on. But this fondness was an active delusion. At one point in time, there was cross-examination about Miss Eisen. You didn't put this in your report, did you? Where is it in your report? You didn't put this in your report. And what she was talking about was actually in the earlier report. Miss Eisen had put certain things in her reports, but Miss Norman was trying to cross-examine her like, you didn't put it in your report. You didn't put it in your report. And speaking of reports, she was cross-examined about this wasn't in a report, this wasn't in a report, this wasn't in a report. Those reports are summaries. They're not transcripts. They also thought that initially, and we have to clean this up when we get back up, oh, he refused to take the test. So you couldn't give him the malingering test because he refused to take it. Leaving an impression that somehow Mr. Reinking knew what was coming and said, oh, I'm not taking the malingering test. But we have to get back up and clear this stuff up. But he didn't know what the test was, had no idea. He was just refusing to take the test. So I bring all that up because it's significant. When we're trying to bring to you the facts of this case and the whole picture, and when some of these cross-examinations are bringing to you a misperception, that is significant in this case. This is serious, very serious. And to do things in a manner that don't give you the whole picture or the complete context is not right. The state called 7 what were supposed to be rebuttal witnesses. Now, rebuttal is basically we put on our case, and then they're supposed to get up and put on proof that would contradict our case. That's what rebuttal proof is supposed to be. So they put on the BMW people, the 2 officers, and the salesperson deposition, which we didn't really dispute any of that, but I still thought it was interesting because you got to hear the salesperson say, yeah, he appeared to be schizophrenic. He appeared to be acting as just like my friend when my friend has a break. Then we had Summerall, who was pretty much off the stand as quickly as he was on it. And then we had the silver bar guy come in. And the silver bar guy just said, yeah, he bought some silver bars from me. Wasn't very complicated or long. He was polite and shy, and he came back and picked them up. I have no idea what that rebuts. Then we had the 2 officers who brought in the styrofoam drawings. You've seen them, they're in evidence. And the second one has a spaceship, a flying saucer on it. This is a year later, almost a year later, has a flying saucer with 3 aliens in it. I would submit that supports my case. Doesn't rebut my case. So you saw 7 people. But who did you not see? You didn't see an expert come in here and dispute Dr. Wood or Dr. Eisen. We've had almost 4 years this case has been pending. Almost 4 years. You know what the state has potentially as resources. Did they go and talk to somebody or not? I have no idea. But over a 4-year period, when we get to the end here, I'll tell you what didn't happen. Not a single forensic psychologist got up there and said Dr. Wood was wrong or Dr. Eisen was wrong. That was not in the rebuttal. I think you know why. Our burden was to present to you by clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe mental disease or defect, and that as a result of that, or because of that, he did not understand that what he was doing was wrong. And we have met that burden. We've met that burden starting back in 2015, 16, 17 with the schizophrenia. They really don't dispute that part of it at all. And we've met the burden by showing that Mr. Reinking was in a crazy state of mind at the time that this happened, believing delusions and hallucinations and disorganized thoughts. Again, it's hard to understand. I don't know that anybody can understand it unless you are him. But that's what happened in this case. You know, we have to show as a result of, did the schizophrenia result in this actions that he didn't know were wrong? Well, what else would have caused it? There is nothing else that would have caused it. The schizophrenia resulted in his actions, and he did not understand and appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions. I want to say just a couple more things before I close. First, I want to talk about sympathy. There's not a person in this room that doesn't have sympathy for Mr. Perez and his family, Mr. Sanderlin and his family, Aquila De Silva and family, to Ebony Groves and the family, for Miss Wagner, Miss Henderson, and everybody else that was in the Waffle House. These victims and their families suffered and are continuing to suffer. Monday and first thing Tuesday morning were two of the toughest days in my career to listen to that. You can have sympathy. We all sympathize. But in making your decision, the judge is going to tell you, you can have no prejudice or sympathy or allow anything but the law and the evidence to influence your verdict. So you can have sympathy, we all do, but you can't come up with a verdict based on that. That's our law. When you go back to deliberate, you talk to each other, but the 12 of you that will remain on the jury, you each have the right to make your own decision in what you think is the right decision in this case. You have to respect the opinions of the others, but you each have your own right to make your own decision, whatever that is. At the beginning, when we did the jury selection, I asked each of you, if we carry our burden of proving by clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Reinking suffered from a severe mental disease or defect, that being schizophrenia, and that as a result of that, he could not appreciate the wrongfulness of his actions, would any of you hesitate to check that box that says not guilty by reason of insanity? And every one of you said, no, we wouldn't hesitate in doing that. If you meet your burden, we'll check not guilty by reason of insanity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've met our burden. We've brought you the proof. Now we're asking you to find him not guilty by reason of insanity. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Jury, we're going to take our good-morning recess at this point in time. Please keep in mind the trial is still in progress, so do not discuss anything about the trial or share your thoughts at this point. We'll get back here in about 10, 15 minutes.